most of human history, people have parented the way their parents and grandparents did, with culture providing the cues. We call this parenting 1.0.
For various reasons, parents began to question these approaches, and we started turning more and more to so-called experts to learn to parent. This was the beginning of parenting 2.0. This allowed for some real advances, but also a lot of confusion as we got further and further away from our natural parenting instincts.
Parenting 3.0 is about reclaiming those instincts and integrating them with our current understanding of child development. It brings together the wisdom of the past with the best scientific and psychological research of the present.
Parenting 3.0 isn't a fad or a quick fix. It's a set of principles that allows us to engage with our kids and life from an informed and empowered place.
I'm Jai Flicker.
And I'm Deb Blum. Welcome to Parenting 3.0.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's show on how to stay calm in the face of getting triggered with our kids. Something that is basically inevitable. We wanted to do a show with this theme because after spending all this time on our recent episodes about focus on attachment, we really wanted to take it down into the nitty gritty of, well, okay, all this theory is really helpful, but how do we implement this on a day-to-day basis? And so we kind of wanted to start with a question of, why is it so damn hard to keep our cool in the face of certain situations with our kids? Whether you have a 2-year-old like me who's really just taking her time or not cooperating, or you have a teenager who's ignoring you because they're so glued to their phone or a video game, or just being rude, plain rude or disrespectful, or anywhere in between. These are just, things parents experience daily, sort of unfortunately, but sort of like inevitably. And so we wanted to explore this because we think that we want this to be helpful, actually helpful.
Yeah. Right.
So.
Right. Because there are a lot of people who talk about theory, but if you don't bring it down to like what's really happening in our home, it isn't that helpful. And I know that, there are a lot of people who I think wake up every morning with the intention to be, this kind of parent, whatever they have in their mind. And what we're inviting people to do, to be like a parent who subscribes to attachment theory, right? And we wake up in the morning and we have the best intentions. And then we walk downstairs, we grab our coffee, all is going well until, one of the kids comes downstairs or one of the kids wakes up or something. And it's hard because, it is so easy to be triggered. And so from my perspective, I feel like there are maybe like 2 avenues that we need to go down to talk about this, because there's the what's happening to the parent is really, really important. And then there's the what's happening with our child. And I'm grappling with which one is more important to go with first, because the what's going on with our child is actually what starts to help us to be able to manage ourselves better in those situations. And but it's also it's like it's hard for me to. Do you have a sense like which way you want to enter? Whether you want to enter talking about us and like our experience of being triggered?
What I would love is a short description of each side of them in just whatever order, and then we can figure out which one to start with.
Okay. Well, so on the parenting side, it's as you said, the inevitable being triggered. It happens. And I would like to explain what a trigger is and explain how, and I want to normalize triggers. Not only do I want to normalize triggers, but because of the work I do, I like to actually revere triggers, because I believe triggers are the pathway toward us being a more peaceful person. I know that seems like a total contradiction, right? Like that. Your triggers will make you more peaceful, but they actually do.
I love that.
And so that's the piece of understanding the parent a parent actually understanding like what's going on with us so that we aren't so judgmental of ourselves, and that we can actually know that there is a pathway that we can go down, that actually we can be less triggered. It's not like some, we have this horrible fate by being a human being that we will be triggered forever and we'll always be reactive. No, it's not true. So that's that piece. On the kid side of it, it's that there is a way that we can look at what's happening with our children in a way that will be less triggering. One of the biggest reasons why we get triggered is actually because I like to use the phrase, we make up a story about what's happening. So we somehow are in resistance to the thing that's happening. And we're like, we want that to be different. And the minute that we want it to be different and we've labeled it as bad or wrong, we will naturally have a response to it.
A certain kind of response. Maybe a negative response.
Yeah, often a negative response, right. In that situation, I mean, sometimes we can label something as good behavior and then we have a different response. But it is the labeling. It is actually the idea that we somehow have made up like an interpretation, or we have a perception about what's going on.
Yeah.
That thought process is usually what causes us to get all tied up in knots.
Yes. And
get angry and reactive. So that's why both pieces are so important, because if you just understand your triggers, but you still look at your child as someone that we want to like control, and we want to sort of like, and that their behavior is actually like in their control and they're being bad.
Yeah.
If we look at them that way, then it's still going to be hard not to get activated. So we'll end up probably getting triggered and then just coming into acceptance of being triggered,
which would be an improvement over what just getting triggered and losing our cool.
Right. Right.
But there's more. It's just more, it sounds to me like the two in tandem, in concert, working together is really ideal.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
So, well, I'm kind of, I can see why you're torn. It's like, I'm like so 50-50. I was going to say, let's start with the parent side of being triggered, but I actually want to start with the child side partly because I'm just like I'm so taken by the idea that the way that we see our kids, the way that we think about them and their behavior, the way we interpret their behavior, like you were just saying, really changes our experience of what's going on and how likely we are to get triggered in the first place.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just our children. I mean, this is true in all relationships.
Great point.
But it's easier to have compassion, I think, for little beings that are dependent on us. I think we can find that compassion. Sometimes I think we look at adults and we expect more from them. And I actually think that's something that happens with our teenagers too. We simultaneously often expect too much from our teenagers and also not enough from them. But in this case, we're usually expecting too much from them.
And just to fill in that gap or that blank, what would be the example of where we don't expect enough of them? Not to go too far down a tangent. Right?
Yeah, we won't go too far down a tangent, but an example would be just like maybe we don't expect, we think we need to do things for them that they don't need to have done for them.
Gotcha.
Like we think like, oh, they can't handle this. We don't have faith in them and their process, and we believe they should be doing it the way we want them to do it. And so we, instead of saying, oh, well, I have faith in them, they'll figure this out, and it might take them longer, or they might do it in a way that doesn't feel good for us. But that's kind of what I mean.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Love that.
Expecting too much is usually, that we think that they should actually be regulated. They shouldn't be reactive, and they should be smart and
responsible,
efficient, right? Responsible. Yeah. So it's probably good to start with the kids, because what we can talk about is it'll start to give us a better understanding of our nervous systems. I think
which is sort of, if you break it down all the way, keeping our cool, remaining calm, staying grounded, cultivating equanimity.
Yes.
It has to do with our physiology, our nervous systems. And
Totally.
so, and how we regulate our nerves, our nervous system. So that's a good place to start. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So for sure. So, well, when I think about a child, so when a child is born, they are, we know they're completely dependent on us. And I think we think about their dependency in the framing of physical needs and emotional needs. But there's actually this other thing that happens that they're learning more and more about, and is that children learn to regulate their nervous systems by co-regulating with the people that they're with all the time. And so when our children are in a dysregulated state, so let's just say they're like crying, or they're, and crying actually can be a very regulating thing, but let's just say they're upset, they're frustrated. Maybe let's just talk about someone like a toddler, because I think it's a better example. Because I think about our babies, our little babies, we tend to be a little more quick to meet their needs, and probably don't get as upset with them. I think, tends to be, we don't get as upset maybe with our littlest babies, but when our babies start to have an opinion about something, we start having maybe some little power struggles with them. And when a child's nervous system is activated, and let's use this as an example, a tantrum. A tantrum's a good example. So when they are having a tantrum, they are the absolute description of dysregulated, right?
Yeah.
So they want something, they can't have it, they're upset, and they're like, probably their reaction is way out of proportion from what you think it should be based on what it is that they didn't get or they wanted or whatever, right?
Especially, if it's like something very mundane and arbitrary.
Yeah, right. I wanted the blue cup, not the red cup, right?
That's perfect example.
Right, and you're like, really? Seriously?
You're going to throw a tantrum over this.
Right.
Seriously.
And they are. And so when we think about the brain, what happens is our child, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. There are way more in-depth descriptions of being triggered, of regulating a nervous system, and there are people who spend their entire life researching this. And so I want to do the best I can to keep it as simple as possible and as short as possible, but to explain it. And please tell me what I miss. But what happens to a child is, or to anyone, when they are triggered or when they are dysregulated, because they're kind of the same thing, but trigger tends to be a little bit more of an extreme, an outward, almost like reaction, or like how it shows up in the world. So let's just say the child's dysregulated. What happens is they are in the emotional center of their brain. And there are words for this. Some people will call it the limbic center, and some people talk about the amygdala. And so, but there's let's just imagine for the moment that it's that you're in the emotional center versus like the thinking center. Okay? Child's in the emotional center. What we typically do in a situation like the red cup, blue cup situation is we come in with reason, which means we use the thinking center of our brain. And we come in with things like, seriously, the red cup is fine. Like, you're going to be, I don't remember which one I said they wanted or didn't want, but let's just say they wanted the blue cup, and like the red cup is fine. The blue cup's in the dishwasher, and we try to make sense of it with them.
Yes.
Well, that is what we're really doing then, is we're literally like, it's as if we're talking to a friend and we're like, okay, I'm going to meet you at Starbucks on 5th Avenue. And the friend shows up on 15th Avenue and says to you, where are you? I'm at Starbucks. It's like, well, wait, you're not even on the same street. Well, that's what happens with our kids when they enter into this place that they're in their emotional center of their brain. When mom or dad comes in and they try to meet them in the kid's thinking brain, the kid's just not there.
Yeah.
And so what do we have to do? We meet them in their emotional center of their brain.
I can't help but add here that I see this same, I'm going to call it a fallacy, or it's not really a fallacy. It's a ineffective strategy being used with teens all the time. It's not usually over such a mundane external event, but it really is common, where parents will try to sort of rationalize and reason with their kids when the kids really more in their emotional center.
Yeah.
And it does not work. And then, and this starts to get into, I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much here, but it starts to get into the story, the narrative, the interpretation, because then it's very easy, I think, for people to start, especially with teens, like with these expectations, to start to go, oh, wow, my kid really is, like sort of intentionally, willfully not listening, or being disrespectful, or so irresponsible, or on and on and on. And so I think this one point alone is so helpful and powerful, because it's like, if we understand that part of the problem is just we're just missing, we're like, one brain is in the one type mode, and the other, it's like literally different languages going right past each other.
We're speaking different languages.
Yeah. And so of course it's not going to work.
Yep.
So yes, so coming into meeting, like, we have to meet people where they are.
That's exactly it, right? It's meeting somebody where they are instead of trying to get them to be where you are. And the key...
and can I interrupt?
Yeah.
To get them where you are, the only hope, if that is the goal, is to first meet them where they are, and then lead
guide them there.
Yeah.
Well, it's exactly it. It's like arguing with reality. Like you're trying to get them where you want them to go by, like,
insisting
strong
that they
arming
be
them
there
right,
already.
Right. Instead of, and I get it, because I still fall in the trap of rationalizing in times when I'm not, whether I'm triggered or I'm just not conscious, I'm just not paying attention, I'm not present in some way.
Yeah.
I can still do that. But when this happens to a person, that's the key thing, is that one little like teaser of a way we have to change our way of looking at this is that, under the age of like 25 years old, your brain is not, your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, it's just not fully developed. So we have to actually be this for our children. We have to be the guide for them. We have to show them how to do this. And the more we show them, the more we model this, and the more we can do this for ourselves, the faster they will develop their prefrontal cortex.
Which I love, because that seems like it really ties the two sides together.
Yeah.
Why we want this for our children. We also need to work on our own stuff, and they end up being very, what's the word? Like,
integrated?
Yeah.
Well, that's what, right. You mean the parts of the brain, or you're talking about the people? Because they're both.
It's all integrated. I was thinking that there's this complementarity between us doing, I mean, obviously in a sense, but I think it's helpful to look at them individually, but then also explicitly show how they interrelate, which is when we do our own work, we're going to be there's sort of a double positive. We're going to be more grounded and peaceful ourselves, so we're going to be more present with our kids and more able to sort of not get reactive in the first place, but we're also going to be modeling for them the very behavior and sort of the type of nervous system that we want them to ideally inhabit.
Yeah.
So
and by the way, just like scientifically, co-regulation is a real thing. So it's not just modeling, it's literally co-regulating. So that's the other thing, is our kids are literally co-regulating. It's like something that happens that we can't, it's like breathing air. It's happening without us knowing. It's a thing that happens between human beings in both directions.
Meaning, if we're constantly in an agitated state,
they're co-regulating.
They're going to co-regulate to that.
Absolutely, and right, and so no question. And so that's why it's so important, because we're not only are we modeling it, not only are we doing our own work, and that's great too, because then we won't be triggered as much. But we're also literally forming their brain by being able to meet them in their emotional center of their brain, and then guide them to their prefrontal cortex. It's that channel. It's like a channel that allows them to develop that, and to and just going back to like attachment theory. Really part of our job in parenting is to help our kids to know that they're like their needs are taken care of and that they're safe and that they're like seen by us. And so if we keep missing the mark by meeting them in their prefrontal in their thinking, trying to meet them in their thinking brain, but they're not there, they're in their emotional brain, we're not seeing them. We just can't be seeing them. We're basically wanting them to be someone they're not in that moment. And one of the reasons why we do this is because we genuinely want them to be, like, we're afraid for them in the world. We don't want them to be just an emotional mess. We want them to do okay in the world. But we also want them to be emotionally healthy. And inadvertently, we often shut down their ability to be the emotional being that we all are. We kind of shut that down, not on purpose. It's accidental. It's like inadvertent because we really are trying. We're doing what we think is good for them, which is like, you can't go to preschool and be a crying mess over everything. You're not going to get your way all the time. I have to show you that you're not going to get your way all the time, right? There's like a way that we really think we're doing the right thing, but actually what our kids need. And I can tell you that in my head, there is a little part of me that will almost always go to like I need to teach a lesson kind of a place. Mm-hmm. And I have to sort of quiet that voice and remember that my only real job is to always see my child, to meet my child where they are and to help to guide them. And I have to take a longer view on this, that I have, I have 18 to 20 something years for my child to get there.
Or even longer.
Right. Seriously, I'm working on, I didn't really mature in some of these ways until I was like now. Like I'm just now maturing. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is helpful to take that long view. I really think so. And looking at my own, I mean, I'm still not just learning as an individual, but I'm also still like cultivating and refining and benefiting from my relationships with my many parents and step-parents.
Sure,
So it's just it's very clear to me that these lessons, it's that sense of urgency. I get it, and at the same time, taking some of that pressure off, I think is helpful, and understanding like this, there really is this long view that's helpful. Can help with taking that pressure off.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to come back to something about, well, I think it's about the way that the brain evolves. I think that's just so fascinating to me that the way that this takes place. I mean, we started to hear more about mirror neurons and how, when we see somebody else's emotional state, we kind of have a it could be an empathetic or a sympathetic response where we mirror that person's emotion, and I think this is really what I was thinking earlier as you were talking about why we might be motivated to try to say, okay, come on, like you can't go into preschool this way or whatever. There's also, I know for myself, and I've seen this in others, there's a way in which when our children are crying or in distress, dysregulated, frustrated, it can be so painful for us.
Yes.
So uncomfortable and so alarming that even if we're thinking, I think there's this projection thing that happens where we're thinking, oh, I want to help relieve their distress.
Yeah. But
we're kind of maybe more motivated by to relieve our own distress.
For sure.
And so there's just a way of like, I think owning that is really important and helpful and because we mentioned in an earlier episode how kids are often more resilient than we give them credit for. And I think emotionally that's true because I mean, I don't think kids necessarily like crying, but I also think it's kind of a normal part of their existence, especially when they're infants and, toddlers. So if a child's crying, they might not actually be in distress about the crying.
Right.
Whereas we are in distress, or all too often are in distress. And so when I remember that, and I can just, it allows me to not feel like I need to fix something and just be more present and available. And so I think that's helpful.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, when my kids were younger, that was really hard for me. I mean, really, really hard for me. When my kids cried, I always felt like I had to, like, come in and rescue them. And so it took time for me to understand that. I don't know that I ever really got it. In the years that they were really young and crying all the time, I probably didn't get that. And it was probably a helpful thing to know. I mean, Gordon Neufeld talks about that crying is a really helpful thing, that crying is a release and that it's really important. Believe me, my kids cried. It's just inside I would feel a lot of distress, and I definitely felt the impulse to try to fix it rather than just to be like, I didn't come to the place where I was really relaxed with it, where it was just like, oh, I can just be with you. Luckily, I learned some of these pieces, and so I put them into practice. But I definitely think that, like, it's like, I think that if anyone can, it's sort of like, how do you find a balance in there, right? We don't want to ignore their crying ever, but we don't always have to fix something.
Right. And one thing that's been helpful for me around that impulse to go in and fix and change, it comes from a style of I don't know if it's therapy or counseling you would call it, but it's called motivational interviewing. And it was developed actually around treating addiction, because all the different available regular styles of therapy just weren't working. And so they developed this very non-directive form of interaction called motivational interviewing that's proved to be more helpful than almost anything else. And one of the concepts that they came up with was the writing reflex, RIGHT, write, not like
writing,
scribbling with a pen or pencil. The writing reflex, and it's the reflex, and I'm sure every parent and most non-parents, if not all, will have felt sense of this, of seeing someone sort of going down a path that might not be ideal, and wanting to step in and fix and change and alter that path. That's the writing reflex, and they talk about very explicitly the importance of sort of resisting, just like you said, that urge to fix. And obviously, it's coming from a place of wanting to help that person avoid pain and suffering, but it can be experienced, and often is experienced, as controlling. And so it gets resisted, which then just leads to frustration on both sides of the equation. And so when we resist our temptation to act out this writing reflex, I find it allows me, it's like, what's left if we're not going to get like actively involved is what is left to us. And really the main thing is just to be present. And when I'm present, I'm much more able to start to attune, because I can start to see or get a felt sense of where that person is. I can start to see, oh, they're really in this context in their emotional brain. So I'm just going to let them, they might need to work through some emotions.
Yeah.
So I'll just add one thing here. And that is going back to earlier, how we were saying that different stories lead to different ways of relating. And I think one story that we often have is just that, emotions are sort of bad, right? Especially the negative emotions of if someone's upset. But I think if we understand that emotions are a process by which we do work through things and that we do release in the process. I mean, literally cortisol comes out, the stress hormone, in our tears, right? So even just knowing that, it's like, okay, well, maybe you just need to like get some cortisol out, and so good for you. But if I come back to that place of, hey, they're working through something, and they just, whether it's my 2-year-old who might have just had a really kind of crazy day and is just kind of worked up and needs to kind of release some of that energy through crying, or whether it's a teenager, if I'm sitting across from them and they've had a tough day or gone through a breakup, and they just need to kind of like let it out. If I resist that writing reflex and I come back into my own presence, it allows them a safe space to do that, and the process kind of has an intelligence of its own that ends up really being beneficial.
Right. And so there is a trust in their own process, a trust in their process. And then there's also a way that, one of the things that I know now better, but I didn't have words for it at the time, is that I think it's really important for our kids to know that they can have emotions and that they will move through them, and that they don't have to risk that you're not going to be able to handle it. Like they can know that you, the parent, are going to be able to kind of like be with them, walking alongside even when they're going through really hard stuff. And often what happens is that when our kids are going through something hard, and it starts when they're really little and it seems insignificant to us, but to them it's a big deal, like the cup thing, it seems like a big deal when we minimize that, that's a big deal to them. It's like they're beginning to get the impression that their issues, their pain isn't being heard, and I don't want to be over dramatizing because, I don't think we have to be 100% on. In fact, there was that study that I sent to you that said that even in securely attached children, that they misattune 70% of the time. So it's not like we're talking about this has to be perfect, but we just have to know that we have, it's a practice is more what it is. It's a practice. I want to kind of go all the way back though for a moment to what happens when the child's in their emotional brain, and then the parent, what it means to actually meet them there. Because what it doesn't mean is, it doesn't mean to go to their level. And that's what a lot of us do, is right. Like we meet them, they're being as emotionally a mess as they are.
We basically
We're
regress.
Like, wah! And that's really, and part of what happens is what you said before with mirror neurons. It's actually a true thing that they are dysregulated and you are co-regulating to them.
Yes.
And we don't want to co-regulate. It goes back to being a unidirectional thing where it's like, this is not bidirectional. We are not to be getting our nerve. I mean, okay, so if they're calm, if their nervous system is really calm and you want to regulate to them, I mean, okay, whatever. What's the harm? But if they're in a messy place, they're emotionally a mess, and then you're not aware, and all of a sudden it's so easy to co-regulate to their dysregulated nervous system.
Yes.
And I wanted to say something that, it's so funny because I think most of us think we only have the only tool we have is words or like physical control or something like that. Like, I'm going to put you in the tub. I'm going to pick you up and put you in the tub.
Yeah.
And we only think that's available. And then when we learn about the nervous system and we realize that like, whoa, there is so much more that is available to us as parents. And so imagine you're in this situation and your child is now a mess, right? Like crying and totally upset. And it's in that moment where we have some choices. We can either co-regulate to them and become a mess with them. That's probably not going to be very helpful. Most of us have done that at some point or another and realize it doesn't work. We can come in and start rationalizing. So we can try to meet them where they're not and, be in their head, in their thinking brain. And that's not going to work, because they're just not there. You're literally, I've actually had this feeling before, and I'm curious if other people have, like where I'm speaking to my child in this like rationalizing thing, and they're literally not there. I can feel their vacancy because they're actually not there. And where they are is in their emotional center. So what does that mean? Because it doesn't mean meeting them there, right? in that way. It doesn't mean showing up and being in that place the same way as they are. But what it does mean is it means that we are able to take a couple breaths and calm ourselves down first, right? So it means that we have to, and so I'm kind of giving a little bit of both. We're going almost down both. They're tied in. Yeah, maybe that's how it has to be. Maybe it's not separate. Though I do want to at some point at the end, I think, just talk about what the like kind of defined the like fight, flight, freeze kind of pieces of it. But I think so what happens is we take some breaths so that we can actually remember we're the parent and that we need to be the person that the child can co-regulate to. So this is an example of like this can be happening very quickly. It doesn't have to, in the beginning it won't. It'll take more time. But we have that moment and we take a nice breath. A nice elongated out breath is the calming breath. So, regular breath in, a long out breath. And you can actually pay attention to the places in your body that are getting activated and just sort of like just be with them. We don't have to stop them from being that. There's a difference between feeling triggered and speaking out or acting out the trigger. So you can feel triggered inside. You can feel like you want to stop this, but you can resist that urge. You can feel the writing reflex and you can, I'm not going to. So what am I going to do? I'm going to try to be as present as I possibly can. And in that moment, what we're doing is we're like, our presence is really what they need. So if you could do nothing else in that moment, but be present with them, that's awesome. We think we have to have words. Well, that's great. And if eventually we can bring words to it, that's great. But even if we're just there and we're just breathing and calming our nervous system, we are actually, we're creating safety for our child. And in that time, we're also possibly we're doing things like nodding at them. Possibly maybe we've decided to pick them up and put them on our lap. Maybe that feels like the right thing to do. But what becomes available, the more present we become, is it doesn't have to become a thinking exercise anymore. We're now kind of saying like, wait, I'm just with my child, And so some words that might get spoken might be something like, I see you really wanted that blue cup. I see that. Because what you're starting to do is just get them to so one of the most calming things you'll ever experience in your nervous system, and this is like all people, this is all human beings, is when someone hears you, understands you, and sees you. It is the most calming thing to your nervous system. What is the most the most disruptive, dysregulating thing to your nervous system is when someone breaks eye contact with you, when they don't understand you, when they interrupt you, when they turn away and just get distracted by something else, when they try to rationalize with you when you are just feeling sad, right? Those are all things we as adults can relate to, right? You're like showing me all the expressions, and it's true, right?
Each one I'm like, oh,
ouch, right? Yeah. So we know this about us. We know that's like, those are hard things to deal with. And so what we really want is just to feel like someone is there with us in our pain or in our happiness or in our whatever, like that someone's meeting us on the same street. So in this situation, the minute that we say, like, you really wanted that cup, like, I totally see that you really wanted that cup. And they're like sobbing, and maybe don't even hear you yet. And you're like, I can see you're really upset right now, right? You're just acknowledging truth, right? You're just speaking the truth of the situation. You're not judging it. You're not deciding like you should or shouldn't be. I mean, yes, you might be, but you're trying to walk yourself away from the judgment and into the place of just being literally with the situation. Yeah. And you're just being with them. And those are the kinds of things that the child slowly is able to start to walk with you. And then, like, say you've now like walked them a little way. Like, let's just say it was a continuum, and now you're halfway between your emotional brain and your thinking brain. And they're starting to like look at you and say, yes, and then you say, I know it's really hard when you can't get what you want. And I get that. It's really disappointing. And it's true. It's just hard. I know sometimes I can't get what I want, and I feel a lot of sadness, and sometimes I want to cry too. So you're just empathetic to them. You're not changing anything, because this is the longer arc of learning of that, like, you don't need to change it in the moment. it might not even be, it might be 5 minutes later, it might be 5 days later that you finally have a conversation. But let's just say that we come around to the place where now, she's okay. She's kind of calming down, and you're now snuggling and you're just talking. And you might say something like, it might be a time where you just say something like, I know that's what you want. You can't have it, but do you want to go over and try to figure out which cup you want now, or something like that? Because that one is in the dishwasher and you're just not going to get it. And so now we're using we're in our thinking brain. They get to understand, like, okay, well, I'm not going to get it, so what do I want to get?
But that doesn't come first because they're just not there.
They're literally not there
at the start.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I can almost assure you it will always take you longer to get there the other way. It just seems like you're taking the fast track, but actually all of a sudden you got derailed, and now you're like, you ruined dinner. Like, nobody is having a good night. All kinds of things are going wrong, and they still didn't get their cup. That you still didn't give them the cup. It's not like the cup was dirty, or the cup is in the car and daddy has it or something. Who knows? All kinds of reasons. So they still didn't get it, and everybody's upset.
Yeah.
And you're upset, and you go to bed feeling guilty again that you didn't
Yeah, not ideal.
Dinner was a big fight or something.
Yeah. This is so important. I'm thinking about one thing. And we talk at different times about the importance of not just latching on to strategies because they can be so easily misapplied. We have to situate them in a larger context and kind of have some, and I feel like one way I've seen this particular kind of what you're talking about saying some of using words to mirror or reflect back what we see in the child. One way I've seen it kind of feel off is when we go to it too soon as a strategy. I'm sort of thinking of, we'll just stay with the cup situation, right? So I could imagine it being more effective for me with my 2-year-old in that moment where she's really disappointed to just scoop her up and say, "Come here, sweetie, come here," and hold her, and not have it be about the cup or about even what she's feeling, trying to put language to it. Some of this might be because of her age.
Yeah.
But there's a way in which I feel like doing that really kind of goes, it really goes more to the core of the emotional center of it all. And I shift really into my emotional supportive core.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a certain amount of effort and intentionality to, if I'm not in that part of my brain, to kind of divert my energy from sort of a thinking mode to a feeling mode. Yeah. And so I think there's a way in which we could sort of avoid doing that work of actually shifting gears by going to the thinking, oh, this is that situation. Let me apply this strategy. I'm going to name, you're feeling really upset. And so it kind of, even though it might be, there is an element of mirroring. I don't think that on the felt sense, on the experiential side of the child's side, they're going to feel fully met there, even though the language might actually kind of at least sort of approximate what they're feeling.
I'm trying to think if so it depends. And so that's part of the reason why I think that in an ideal world, we have gotten present pretty quickly first, because then we're really attuning. So we are really tapping into what's needed in that moment.
Yeah.
I probably would say it does depend on the age. And the reason why I say that is because, there were plenty of times there was no picking up my kids. like I wasn't able, they weren't, that was not going to happen. They were like, they were not interested in anything from me. They were really mad at me at that moment. And so I literally could have been, you know, there was just they did not want, I mean, maybe I could have, forced myself on them, and that might have been a solution for them, but I don't think that that's really what they wanted in that moment. They really wanted the cup, like, say, for example. That's what they wanted. They were angry that they weren't getting the cup, and that's what they thought. What age
are you imagining?
Well, so I'm not. The cup isn't as good of an example in that as they get older, because I do think that I don't know if my kids were. They definitely did fight over cups when they were younger. I just don't remember which age they were at.
No, but like, forget about the external scenario for a second.
Yeah.
If your kid is mad, and he or she doesn't want to be picked up, which, I mean, I have that same situation sometimes, I go in and I go, come here, and she's like, no, it's just like, okay, you need your space. But I'm just curious, are you picturing a 9-year-old? Are you picturing a 6-year-old? Are you picturing a 12-year-old?
Well, I mean, I do this all the time. Like, I do this with my kids now all the time. And so, but I definitely am not picking them up anymore. I can assure you of that. I like what you're saying, and I agree with you in that I think there's something really simple about what you're saying, like more simple about just like it's like, instead of having to go into your head, you just sort of connect with them. But I also think that when you're already in your head, so a lot of times that's what's happening, like I'm going to speak for me, like I'm in my head, I'm like cooking dinner, I'm doing something, whatever, I'm trying to get through my to-do list, and then something happens. So I'm already in my head. So just like they need to be walked from their emotional center to their thinking brain, I have to walk myself from my thinking center to my emotional brain. Sometimes those words are actually for me. So sometimes those words are for me to get connected to their experience. So if I have nothing else I can do in that moment, I can breathe, and I can start just like saying what I see. I can just start saying what I see, because I can try to not put judgments around it, because that's where it goes wrong, is when we start doing things like, you're a mess, like, what's wrong with you, or like, you start kind of like labeling it. If I just start saying like, you're really upset you didn't get the red cup, the blue cup, whatever it is that I'm saying, or like, you're really upset that you didn't get the grade that you wanted, or something like that. If I say something like, I'm really upset that you didn't get the grade that you wanted, or that's like, or if I even just say something like, I don't need to join them, I guess is the point. I don't need to join them in whatever they're going. I'm just saying what I see happening. That guides me to my heart, because I start to get into an emotional place with them. I get to be like, oh, like that does suck that they're going through that right now. Like, I was being judgy, but if I can get beyond my judginess, like, I guess I would be disappointed if I were little and I wanted something and I couldn't have it. So I'm now regulating my nervous system at the same time. I'm calming myself down, and I'm meeting them to where they are. So I hear what you're saying, and I do get that it can seem like a strategy, and, I don't think there's never going to be strategies, but I think it comes from the place of, like, how can I create a safe space for my child, that I'm the parent and they're the child. It's so alpha. Oh, yeah, we have talked about alpha. It's so alpha. It's the most loving alpha thing we can do, is to basically be the open arms that says, you can go through anything and I'm going to be with you. I can manage my own nervous system, and I can be with you in this situation. I can hold it all. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think I've heard people say, like, I felt like I was too much for my parents. Yeah. Right? For sure. I had really big feelings, and I was just too much for them. Yeah. And that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, because you're just not being met. You're not being met. You're not being held. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So there's a safety in that. There's a safety in feeling like, they're that way, and that the parent is that way. And And then we've guided them, and then we can go into talking about things and we can make sense of things. But again, there have been times with my kids where I don't talk about we don't make sense of it right away. It's a couple days later that I say, hey, remember that thing the other day when that thing happened? I might go as far as just saying something like, I didn't like the way you talked to me. And I just want you to know that. And I want you to know it's not okay with me. And I was with you, and I will always be with you. And I also want you to figure out other ways. And sometimes I'll ask them, do you want to brainstorm other things you could have said to me? Or do you just want to come up with it on your own? But so I still set a limit, but I might not set a limit in that time. Because sometimes kids, not my kids, all kids, sometimes people take time to come from their emotional center to their thinking center. I have been triggered before where I have been, in some of my worst times, I have been triggered for weeks. I'm triggered for weeks. I'm raw about the thing for weeks. There's no making sense of it yet. I can attempt to, but I can't do it. So I know there are times I can feel when my kids are kind of past the point where now there's no longer the charge anymore of whatever happened. Yeah. So that's one thing. Do you have more on that? Because I feel
I have a one idea or one thought from before about in the moment. Another, for me, coming back from the edge of actually being fully triggered. For me, most of my ability to kind of do a good job as a parent, if you want to call it that, in those emotionally charged moments, is not about just exerting some superhuman willpower to not get triggered in that moment. It comes from having done practice in advance.
Yes.
So I guess I wanted to just talk a little bit about that and say, I've spent a lot of time, a fair amount of time. I mean, I don't want to go overboard, but a fair amount of time throughout my adult life, exploring meditation and mindfulness and different techniques of centering. Some, I did some qigong, and that was very calming and grounding and centering. So those I knew in the moment that, especially with the qigong, that we were talking about how we're like attuning our nervous system, we're calming and soothing our nervous system, and that felt really good. And in meditation, I could, even though that language didn't come up as much, I could feel myself getting more grounded and centered and getting practice at non-reactivity of agitation arising and going, oh my goodness, and then saying, okay, I'm just going to sit with it and breathe. And it's like, there's a way in which it's kind of like the grain of sand that forms the pearl. It's like this irritating experience. If we sit with it, as anyone who's spent some time doing this will probably have the experience of, it kind of just by staying with it, something forms, a bigger space opens up around it, that spaciousness. And so I certainly wasn't thinking, to be just honest, I was not thinking at all when I was doing these meditation retreats or whatever about, oh, this will be so helpful for parenting. It was sort of this really massive, sort of unexpected side benefit, or it turns out maybe it wasn't the side benefit. Maybe it was the main benefit all along. I don't know.
It was divine.
It was so helpful. Yes. And, but so I know that when there's a mode that I have now that I can engage, and I don't always remembering to do so is a big part of it. But when my daughter's really losing it, and I'm tempted, sort of being dragged down with her emotionally, or my that pull to start to kind of regress into that same dysregulated state is happening. There is a mode where I can sometimes, not always, but sometimes catch it and go, okay, I'm going to shift into a different mode here. I've been here before, and I have a sort of my own seat that I can take and just go, I'm just going to be present.
Yep.
And it's, so that's just, I think it's really helpful. And it's possible that if I had come to meditation later, that, I mean, I have been a terrible meditator in many ways, because I just cannot stand sometimes sitting there and watching my breath. It just is like, come on, I mean, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain things that I am willing to endure for the sake of others more than I am if it's just for my own personal benefit, whether it's for the teens that I work with or my own daughter. And so I wonder, I haven't quite tried this, but I just want to throw it out there. It could be helpful for other people to, if you feel like you want to cultivate more groundedness, and you think, oh, mindfulness or meditation would be helpful, maybe the motivation to do so could come as much, if not more, from wanting to be there for your child than for just trying to be a better person.
I totally agree. I've also been meditating for many years, but I didn't meditate before I had children. And I do feel like it's a huge advantage for people who have, because I think it makes a really big difference. And I think that it's changed it. I would say it's changed my life, but I do meditation in many forms. And I like you, I do not consider myself to be an excellent meditator or anything. But the other two things I want to invite people to consider as possible tools, and then I would love to talk a little bit more about changing our mindset about our children. But two other tools. One is journaling, because part of what you're doing when you meditate is you're watching your thoughts. You're not getting hijacked and you're not getting like grabbed by them, but you are watching them, and you're trying to like let your thoughts go without attaching onto them. Well, sometimes what you can do in journaling is the same thing. So you can be writing them out, but like letting them go, sort of like it's a way of letting them go. And so journaling is really good. In fact, if I would say now, present day, my practice is a journaling practice. And someday I can share more about that, because it's been so helpful for me. The second thing, which is probably the thing that changed my life, I would say, saved my marriage, probably I would say, is learning how to do inquiry into our thoughts. And so for me, that was Byron Katie's work. So there's a thing you can go to, it's called thework.com, and you can actually go out and this goes back to, someday I really want to talk more in more depth about why I love triggers so much. But Byron Katie has a worksheet called Judge Your Neighbor, I think, or Judge Thy Neighbor. And it's the point that, triggers and judgments and blame and criticism, they're actually information. And if the more you can do inquiry work around them, the less you will get triggered in the long run. So there are two parts to being about triggering. There is the part about the awareness of the trigger and then being able to calm yourself down and then not react. But there's also doing the work so that you're literally not triggered as much anymore. And so let me talk for a moment about how we might be less triggered by our children.
Great.
So before I do that, I just want to say, or actually kind of along the lines with this, what's important to note about our children is like, they're not doing this on purpose. Like even the thing about like the red cup versus the blue cup, it's not like the kid isn't like, I just want to make my mother's life miserable right now. Like I see she's in the middle of something, I'm just going to like ruin it. Now it's possible that they're feeling like they're not getting attention, and they might act out for that. But it still comes from a deep need that they have, which is a need for attention, a need for some connection.
Yeah.
So they might be acting out in that way, but they are not thinking that way. And even most teenagers aren't thinking that way. They're just, what happens to all people is that we have an inner experience. Like a child has an inner experience. They do not know what that is. Like even the desire for connection. they aren't going to go, they're not necessarily going to say like, hi daddy, like I just need some connection right now. Like that's not probably what they're going to do. They're going to act out. So imagine what acting out is. It's like I feel something and then I act it out instead of, I don't have the words for it, so I must act it out. It's like charades, and you are the person who gets to be the detective, or the person on the other side who gets to figure this out. What is it that they need in this moment? And the mantra that I use, I'm telling you, it's been a lifesaver for my marriage and for my parenting, is that the thing is never the thing. So it's always like the kid is doing the thing about the cup, but it's actually because something happened during the day that like they were really upset, and it's their way of acting out the emotion that they don't know how to put into words yet, that they don't understand. And that is happening with all human beings all the time, by the way. It's surprising we can have the types of healthy relationships we have, because so often we don't even know what we're feeling. To this day, I can often have something, I don't know what I'm feeling, and I'm like almost like grasping at what is it that's like this uncomfortable thing, and I'm acting it out in all these ways, and finally I'm like, oh my God, right, I'm feeling hurt from that conversation an hour and a half ago. And I just didn't get there. So imagine if we're going through that, our kids are going through it all the time. They do not have the words yet. And so that's why for me, it's just been, I just think of myself. It's so funny because I'm like feeling a sensitivity to this idea of like, is this a strategy? But it's not. It's a way of being. It's like, I consider myself to be an emotional coach for my child, and that's including my nervous system. And so it's really like, to some degree, it's also giving language to emotions. It's like, being able to like, all right. So if my kids would say things that were rude to me, I would often say to them, you must be really angry to have said something like that to me. What's going on?
Love it.
Okay, because they wouldn't normally say something. Like there's got to be something going on inside of you. What is it that's going on? And a lot of times it's not, they still couldn't give me the words. But what they got in that moment was just one more acknowledgement that, like, first of all, they're not wrong for acting out their emotions, but also they're learning the language. They're learning, like, maybe the next time they might say, Mom, I'm really angry, instead of, I hate you, which my kids didn't tend to say I hate you. I know a lot of kids do. I don't even know that my kids ever said I hate you. I think I made it through all these years and they've never said that to me.
Love it.
But they have said other rude things to me. Sure.
Well, and one thing I like about that, where your response in that situation, where you say, you must be feeling really angry to have said that. It feels like it's communicating this generous interpretation. It's like saying, it's sort of implied in there, wow, this is not like you.
Yes.
This instead of saying, you are so rude, you are really getting to be a disrespectful person, which kind of reinforces a negative identity. You're saying, wow, there must be some extenuating circumstance for you to be acting like that.
Yeah.
And if I was on the receiving end of that message, I would want to naturally change my behavior for the positive to match up with your positive implied view of me. So I think that's a brilliant aspect to that response that is a little bit, it's included, but is a little different than just naming the emotion. But that's also it, not to downplay the importance of the emotional naming, because I think if at the same time, I mean, it's working on all these different levels.
It is
simultaneously. At the same time, if you say to me, wow, you must be really angry to have said that, I'm going to immediately go, oh, am I?
Yeah.
I'm going to start to wonder, am I angry? And either I'm going to feel totally seen, like, oh wow, yeah, I am angry, and so you just totally nailed it. Like, wow, she gets me more than I even get myself, and that's gonna feel good. Or let's say it's not exactly anger, it's frustration, which maybe is just a shade different, or maybe I'm just really upset or sad or hurt. At the very least, I'm feeling this generous interpretation. I'm getting that you're pointing to there's something else going on. Maybe it's anger, but no, and then all of a sudden I'm more likely to say, no, I'm not angry. I'm just sad.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I think so. There's just so many positive things about that, and it avoids saying something hurtful.
Yes.
So I think, I mean, I guess I want to just sort of say something about this. I don't want to demonize using strategies too much, just a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, I think there are two kinds of, not just two kinds of strategies, but two meanings of the word. Mm-hmm. Where one is like sort of latching on to a fragment of just like sort of the simplistic idea, where it's just like, if my kid does this, I do this. Exactly. And there's no context, there's no understanding, there's no depth. But if you have a strategy that is properly contextualized and does have a connection to depth, then I think it's really useful to have sort of a general strategy. So I just wanted to...
Yeah, well, thank you for that, because I know I was being all self-conscious about it. But I do think that this, in this case, to me, it's still so much attachment theory. It might not be like attachment theory in the way that maybe Gordon Neufeld talks about it or something like that, but it's still based on relatedness or relating. It's really... I think that the key thing is, like, at some deep level... if we can understand that our children will not emotionally mature if we do not lend them some of our parts, like our prefrontal cortex, like if we're not there guiding them, they will not emotionally mature. At least they may emotionally mature, but I don't think they're going to emotionally mature in the way that we are hoping that they will, because they actually do need the guidance. They actually don't have the words to articulate what they're feeling inside. And almost all bad behavior, like what we've labeled as quote unquote bad behavior, almost all bad behavior is simply a dysregulated child, a child who doesn't understand what's going on, a child who feels feelings inside that they cannot explain. And it could be nothing to do with the situation. It could be something to do with another situation. It's coming out.
Hearing you say that, just kind of a little light bulb went off about what you were saying earlier about acting out, and it's like, you know, if your child is upset about something and they're acting it out, it's like there's a way we say this, and this is why sometimes the nuance is so important. If we just say, wow, they're really acting out, and we don't think about what that means, and we don't connect it to something deeper, we're going, wow, they're really acting out. That's just a negative. It's like, oh, really acting out, you know? But if we connect it to what you were saying earlier, oh, yeah, they're acting something out.
They're acting something out.
What is it?
I know. And then you can actually like see, like, the energy you have is exactly what I want people to feel. Is it's like almost like what could it be? Yeah. Like almost like I have it's like a sacred responsibility to be able to look at your child and know that they cannot figure themselves out in that moment. And the world is not going to take the time to figure them out, but I will. I will be the one that will say, yeah, it gets me a little teary even into this, to like think about like how isn't that what we want our children to feel, is at the only relationship they have any chance of getting that in is the parent-child relationship, because that's not how life works. And in general, life doesn't work that people are slowing down enough to really hold us. I mean, maybe we have some relationships where maybe we're lucky to have some relationships where we're that held that deeply, but the one relationship where it's like we're allowed as parents to do that and the child is allowed to be dependent on us, like it's beautiful, and we get to hold that for them, and we get to be their guide. We get to guide them back to themselves, because when we don't do that, what happens is our kids they have to shut down in some ways. Like if they're not being met emotionally, they have to shut down their emotions to be safe in the world, to be safe in their home.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, and it's not something we have to be perfect about, but it's something that we can learn to do better.
Yeah.
And the more we do it, the safer our kids feel, the more likely they're going to be able to talk to us, and they're going to be able to tell us things that are vulnerable, things that they might not share with other people.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just struck by this idea that, and we've talked a little bit about this, but that we're not talking about this to pile homework onto an already busy parent of like, you really should be doing more meditation or more, you really
Right,
should be
right.
learning this new strategy for this. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. Mm-hmm. We don't want people to be feeling like they just need another thing to try to be a better person. It's really coming from a place of knowing and having the experience of having insights that help make my life easier, make my relationship with my child better, that actually don't cost a lot or don't take a lot of energy, or at least don't take more energy and effort than what's already happening.
Yeah.
They might take energy, but it's actually a net savings and more effective.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's way less energy.
Yeah.
It just seems, or at the end of the year.
At the end of the century.
At the end of right. Maybe even 18 years.
Yeah. Let's not get too carried away. Yeah. So I just wanted, but I do want to emphasize that it's like, and look, people are very different in how they go about learning things. And I am more of a person who likes to just absorb things and then let them sort of work in the background or kind of like just sort of organically integrate. And other people are a lot more detail oriented. They want to write things down and they want to take notes and they want to think about it. And it's, everyone, different strategies work differently for different people. So, but I just feel like there's a way in which what we're really talking about is shifting into an overall mindset where we're being understanding, we're staying grounded within ourselves, and we're understanding our role differently, our responsibility, that it's not just to get our kids to behave, that we're giving them an education, an emotional education in the process of going through all these ups and downs. It's like these are learning opportunities, and the more I think we see them as such, the more we can sort of make lemons into lemonade.
Yeah. All right, well, so this has been a great, really rich and full episode with a lot in it. And I would just invite people to take one thing, to just find something in here that feels like it's something you want to pay attention to, and then just literally bring awareness to it this week. And you might find you need to listen to this a couple of times. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there was so much in this. And I'm excited because I think it's really important stuff.
thanks everyone for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And we are looking forward to having you join us next week. And as always, if you are valuing this, if you're appreciating it, please, subscribe, and if you haven't already, and share it and review it and rate it with 5 stars if you like, if you feel like it's worthy, and we hope it is. And then we will see you next time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.